sees the potentials and he sees the problems. To investigate both and to develop the technology that will turn potentials into realities, the United States is conducting, for the benefit of all nations, a program it calls Plowshare. The 100-kiloton nuclear explosion excavated more than 6 million cubic yards of earth in a matter of seconds. The result was a crater more than 1,200 feet in diameter, the length of 4 football fields, and 325 feet deep, the height of a 32-story building, created in less time than it takes to describe it. And the dust cloud. Just as with radiation, these other safety problems are subject to control by selecting the minimum yield necessary to do the job. For these immense projects, in areas that are relatively isolated and underdeveloped, nuclear excavation offers the potential for providing the practical, economical means. That when nuclear explosives are buried at the depth that will produce the biggest crater, a major part of the radioactivity is swallowed up in the rubble of the crater. But the most promising results have been gained by improving the design of the explosive itself. Moving 68 million cubic yards of earth. This project, or a similar mountain cut, would be an effective demonstration of Plowshare's potential with rows of nuclear explosives. Nuclear explosives could excavate the sea level canal at 1/3 the cost of conventional excavation and in considerably less time. And the end result would be a much wider and much deeper channel.
One-tenth kiloton explosive was buried 90 feet deep in hard rock. When the explosive was detonated, the velocity of the rock movement was not enough to form a crater at all, but instead a mound of broken material. Not a crater, yet still valuable nevertheless in developing crater technology and mechanics.
It's like the interior of this building. There was pieces of their desks and pieces of the photos on their desks.
Could conventional demolition explosives vaporize all the people, computers, and office furniture in the towers, while pulverizing all the concrete in the floors into fine powder, and have enough left over to fracture the welded steel framework of up to 4-inch thick steel beams?
Trudging through this snow-like substance.
Our paper powder theory has been recognized as evidence of a thermonuclear device being detonated in the basements of both towers and World Trade 7 in order to superheat all the steel and concrete and sufficiently weaken the structure to facilitate the observed progressive collapses.
There was a schoolyard across the street, and I remember there were kids that were being evacuated from the schoolyard. And one of the girls looked up into the sky and she said to her father, "Daddy, look, they're doing it on purpose."
Let's quickly review the 3 main events in order for World Trade Center 2, World Trade Center 1, and World Trade Center 7. This photo shows the top section of the South Tower leaning at a sharp angle early in its collapse. This style of controlled demolition was also seen in Philadelphia in 1999. Instead of the top section falling into the street in one piece in accordance with Newton's 3 laws of motion, we can observe fragmented debris ejected horizontally outward, followed by clouds of fine pulverized concrete dust. The observed South Tower pre-collapse detonation sequence indicates numerous explosions accompanied by dust clouds rising hundreds of feet from the base of the towers.
I did pass through a couple of parks and on some of the streets, and before, when I reported about an hour ago, there were people at their gas pumps who turned to look at the smoke that was coming from the city, folks stepping out of bodegas and stores to look. Now people are gathering in large groups. In fact, in one corner, I saw a group of people actually holding hands and praying. As I stand on the Manhattan Bridge, which is closed, it is open to pedestrian traffic. Some people are walking across, but there's just no way for them to, as I look out, something else that I can't see.
Some eyewitnesses have told us that the explosion sounded as if the whole building was coming down.
It looked like it looked sort of like the building just demolished. Smoke, clouds, clouds of smoke everywhere. And just heard a huge explosion. It's about 8:30 behind me. I thought perhaps the building was being demolished, but in fact, you thought there were just towers of smoke coming out within minutes. And again, we still thought it was just a building demolished. There wasn't any great sort of panic at that time.
And, of course, this has been the nightmare, Katie, for national security officials for a long time. We talk about nuclear bombs and those kinds of exchanges or invasions, but everyone has been terribly worried about the suitcase-sized bomb of some kind or an...
There was a sort of a panic run by the rest of the commuters, and then there was a huge explosion. And as we sort of rushed out of the building, we saw what looked like a ticker tape parade. Papers and streamers flowing everywhere. It just looked so surreal, but then the sheer fear and, I guess, the panic of the situation, but most of us just ran to side corridors and stuff like that outside on the street. And then moments later, there was another explosion.
And just heard a huge explosion. It's about 8:30 behind me. I thought perhaps the building was being demolished, but in fact, you thought there were just towers of smoke coming out within minutes. And again, we still thought it was just a building demolished. There wasn't any great sort of panic at that time. And then you saw flames raging through the building, and then approximately sort of 15, 20 minutes later, a plane flew down right above us, so very, very close to our heads, and smashed right into the other tower. A massive explosion, and people were screaming and sort of panic. There wasn't even many fire ambulances and things like that on the street. It all happened so quickly.
Close to the base of that building, trying to evacuate people, and when a building of that size falls, it does not fall on its own footprint.
No, absolutely.
And what we cannot tell you is if there was a second explosion that caused that collapse, or if it was simply... That's the first one. That's the South Tower collapsing. And that was about a half hour, give or take, after the planes hit the tower. Then shortly after that, just as the smoke was starting to clear away, the second tower, and that's what you're looking at now. Again, this was not very long ago, 10, 15 minutes ago. The second tower, it almost looks like one of those implosions of buildings that you see, except there is nothing controlled about this.
It is hard to conceive, but 3 days ago, both World Trade Towers rose 1,362 feet into the sky. Visit those same towers today. At their tallest point, they rise maybe 100 feet above the street. And while it's true there are 6 floors below street level, now filled with debris, engineers at the firm that built the building's best guess to account for the missing 1,200 feet of material from each tower is that large portions simply vaporized into the dust that rained down on New Yorkers immediately after the collapse. It was that powerful.
Get out of here!
We're talking here about 43,600 windows, 600,000 square feet of glass, 200,000 tons of structural steel, 5 million square feet of gypsum, 6 acres of marble, and 425,000 cubic yards of concrete, turned in good part into a cloud, says environmental medical doctor Stephen Levin.
I was astonished at the degree to which solid materials were turned into pulverized dust as a consequence of that building collapse. I think it was striking.
The Environmental Protection Agency has been sampling the dust, and one specialist told ABC they believe the clouds that appeared immediately after the collapse were mostly gypsum dust from drywall, cement dust, and plaster, which can cause problems.
Cement dust is an irritant. Fine glass powder is also an irritating material.
The EPA did find spotty levels of asbestos. A sample on a police car turned out dangerous. Another sample a couple of blocks away, not dangerous. But most interesting, in the mix, they are looking, they think, at specks of steel that used to be beams and elevators, marble from the lobby floor and facings. So what were once the strongest architectural elements in the two towers were pulverized, large portions turned into clouds like this one. Still, there is this mystery. If some of the hardest materials were vaporized, how to account for the presence everywhere of paper, fully intact letters, business forms, stationery. Paper is so fragile and combustible, and yet somehow, maybe because we have so much of it, it was everywhere. Robert Krulwich, ABC News, New York.
Ground zero itself. Now let us turn to the state of the economy, both specific and general.